into family. The castle in which we meet this evening.
You won't believe what really happens inside the royal family's secret castle. Workers are forced to bow to empty rooms. They scrub floors until their knees bleed. Some work 18 hours for pocket change, while King Charles sits on $1 billion fortune.
Everything I've tried to do in the past 50 years has been done.
But here's the shocking part. Dozens of staff just walked out overnight, and what they revealed will absolutely destroy everything you thought you knew about the royals. The palace tried to silence them for 150 years, but the truth is finally out. Every morning at this castle, something unusual happens. Staff members must curtsy to empty rooms. Even if a royal family member has just left, workers bow to the vacant space where they once stood. This practice has continued since the 1870s, and no one has ever questioned it. But this strange ritual is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the mysterious world of Balmoral. The story begins in the summer of 1852, when Prince Albert was browsing through a newspaper during a particularly rainy day. He came across an advertisement for a Scottish estate that immediately caught his attention. The property was called Balmoral, and something about the description fascinated him. Without consulting anyone, not even Queen Victoria, he quietly arranged to purchase the entire estate for £32,000. To put this in perspective, that amount would be worth approximately $4.5 million in today's money. Prince Albert's decision to buy Balmoral without telling his wife might seem impulsive, but he had a vision. He saw potential in this remote Highland location that others might have overlooked. The existing house on the property was modest and somewhat run down, but Albert envisioned something much grander. He wanted to create a private retreat where the royal family could escape the pressures of court life and experience a different side of Scotland. Queen Victoria was initially surprised by her husband's purchase, but she quickly fell in love with the location. The couple visited Balmoral for the first time in September 1852, and Victoria later wrote in her diary that the Highland air felt completely different from anything she had experienced before. The landscape reminded Albert of his childhood home in Germany, while Victoria found the rugged beauty both refreshing and inspiring. However, the existing building simply would not do for their needs. Within just a few years of the purchase, Albert made the bold decision to completely demolish the old house and start fresh. He commissioned the construction of a new granite castle that would reflect both Scottish heritage and his own architectural preferences. The project began in 1853, and by 1856, the new Balmoral castle stood complete. Prince Albert was deeply involved in every aspect of the design process. He personally sketched the castle's distinctive clock tower, drawing inspiration from German castle architecture that he remembered from his youth. Albert insisted that every window should open properly to allow fresh Highland air to flow through the rooms. He believed that good ventilation was essential for health and comfort, a somewhat progressive idea for the time. One of the most touching details Albert included in the design was a series of stone carvings near the main entrance. These carvings depicted all 9 of his and Victoria's children, ensuring that the family would always be represented in the very structure of their Highland home. This personal touch showed how Albert viewed Balmoral not just as a royal residence, but as a true family retreat. The architectural choices Albert made were quite deliberate. He designed the castle's hallways to be narrower than typical for a building of this size. His reasoning was simple but clever. He wanted family members to encounter each other more frequently as they moved through the building. Albert believed that these chance meetings would encourage more natural family interactions and bring everyone closer together. In an era when royal protocol often kept family members formal and distant, this was his way of promoting genuine relationships. The castle's construction utilized local white granite that sparkles distinctively when sunlight hits the stone. This material choice not only made practical sense, but also helped the building blend with its Highland surroundings. The granite came from quarries on the estate itself, making Balmoral truly a product of its environment. Albert's clock tower became one of the castle's most recognizable features. He specifically designed it to ring in the key of E-flat, rather than the more traditional deeper tones. His reasoning for this unusual choice was characteristically thoughtful. He wanted to ensure that the bells would not frighten the Highland ponies that roamed the estate. This attention to detail extended to every aspect of the castle's design and operation. As construction progressed, the estate continued to grow. Albert and Victoria purchased additional land whenever it became available, eventually expanding Balmoral to over 53,000 acres. To put this size in perspective, the estate became larger than major cities like San Francisco or Paris. The property included mountains, forests, rivers, and eventually over 150 separate buildings of various sizes and purposes. The royal couple's vision for Balmoral extended beyond just the main castle. In 1866, they constructed a 3-mile private railway line specifically designed to transport royal luggage and supplies in complete secrecy. This railway allowed the family to move their belongings without public observation, maintaining the privacy that made Balmoral so appealing as a retreat. The castle itself contained 167 rooms when completed, making it a substantial residence by any standard. These rooms served various purposes, from private family quarters to formal reception areas, staff accommodations, and storage spaces for everything from hunting equipment to the extensive royal wardrobe required for Highland activities. Contemporary critics had mixed reactions to Albert's architectural achievement. Some praised the castle's distinctive Scottish baronial style and its harmonious relationship with the surrounding landscape. Others were less impressed, with some describing it as resembling a large cold barn rather than a proper royal residence. Despite these criticisms, Balmoral's influence on Scottish architecture was immediate and lasting. Within 20 years of Balmoral's completion, approximately 80% of new country houses built in Scotland adopted similar architectural styles. The castle had essentially started a trend that would define Scottish estate architecture for generations. Wealthy landowners across Scotland wanted to capture the same romantic Highland atmosphere that Albert had achieved at Balmoral. Queen Victoria's feelings about their Highland home were much more positive than those of the critics. She frequently wrote about how the castle smelled of pine and what she called freedom. For Victoria, Balmoral represented an escape from the rigid formality of court life in London. Here, she could experience a more relaxed version of royal living, while still maintaining appropriate dignity and protocol. The location of Balmoral was crucial to its appeal as a private retreat. Situated deep in the Scottish Highlands and accessible only by a long, winding single road, the estate offered natural protection from public attention. This isolation allowed the royal family to conduct their private lives away from the constant scrutiny they faced elsewhere. However, there was an important legal distinction that set Balmoral apart from other royal residences. Unlike Buckingham Palace or Windsor Castle, which belonged to the Crown and therefore to the British people, Balmoral was purchased as private property. This means that it belongs personally to the royal family, and any income generated from estate activities goes directly to them, rather than to the public treasury. This private ownership has allowed the royal family to operate Balmoral according to their own preferences, rather than public oversight. When deer are harvested and sold, when cottages are rented to tourists, or when timber is harvested from the estate's forests, the profits remain with the royal family. Some members of Parliament have questioned this arrangement over the years, but the royal family has consistently maintained their right to private ownership of the estate. King Edward VII once described Balmoral as their inescapable refuge, emphasizing how important this privacy was to the royal family's well-being. The isolation that Balmoral provided was not just physical but also psychological, offering a space where royal family members could temporarily set aside some of the burdens of their public roles. When the royal family arrives at Balmoral each summer, they bring with them an entire world of traditions, rules, and people that most of the public never sees. The castle might appear quiet from the outside, but during the active season, it becomes home to nearly 150 workers who make royal life in the Highlands possible. The staff at Balmoral represents a complex hierarchy that has evolved over more than a century. There are gillies, The traditional Scottish hunting and fishing guides, who know every stream and hillside on the estate. Horse handlers care for the animals that are essential to Highland life, from the sturdy Highland ponies to the horses used for daily rides across the moors. Professional cooks prepare meals that must meet royal standards, while often working with game and local ingredients. Cleaners and housekeepers maintain the castle's 167 rooms to spotless condition. Perhaps most unusually, there is one staff member whose sole responsibility is to play the bagpipes every morning at exactly 7 o'clock. This piper stands beneath the king's bedroom window and performs traditional Scottish tunes to wake the royal household. This tradition dates back to Queen Victoria's time and continues unchanged today, regardless of weather conditions or the king's actual presence in the castle. Every single person who works at Balmoral, from the most senior positions to temporary seasonal help, must sign what the royal household calls a lifelong silence promise. This agreement goes far beyond typical employment contracts. Workers pledge never to discuss what they see, hear, or experience during their time at the estate. The consequences of breaking this promise are severe and immediate. Anyone who violates their silence agreement faces instant dismissal and potential legal action. The daily workload for staff members during the active season is enormous. Housekeepers and maids work shifts that can extend to 18 hours, especially during periods when the castle hosts guests or special events. They must clean and polish hundreds of individual pieces of silver daily, maintain fires in over 50 fireplaces throughout the castle, and ensure that every room meets the exacting standards expected by the royal family. The heating system at Balmoral relies heavily on traditional fireplaces, which means staff must handle massive quantities of wood throughout the season. The estate burns through approximately 60 tons of birchwood each year, and maintaining the supply requires constant work. Workers must split, carry, and stack wood, then clean fireplaces and remove ash daily. During cold Highland winters, keeping the fires burning becomes a round-the-clock responsibility. Meals at Balmoral follow traditions that blend formality with the estate's outdoor lifestyle. The royal family often enjoys what they call royal picnics beside the River Dee, where they eat outdoors regardless of typical Scottish weather. In a gesture that surprises many visitors, the king himself often insists on doing the dishes after these outdoor meals. However, even these casual moments follow strict protocols that staff must understand and maintain. The rules governing staff behavior remain as strict as they were in Queen Victoria's era. Many workers are prohibited from speaking unless directly addressed by a member of the royal family. Others must live on the estate grounds in staff quarters, which isolates them from outside social contact during their employment. The combination of long hours, strict rules, and isolation creates an environment that many find difficult to endure. During hunting season, which represents Balmoral's most active period, staff members participate in activities that extend far beyond typical household duties. Workers assist with hunting expeditions that can result in harvesting up to 200 deer each winter. This involves tracking, field dressing, and processing game, as well as maintaining hunting equipment and preparing elaborate hunting lunches in remote locations across the estate. The annual Gillies Ball represents one of the most unusual traditions at Balmoral. Every September since 1858, this event brings together royal family members and estate workers in a way that temporarily suspends normal social boundaries. The ball begins promptly at 7 o'clock in the evening, and tradition dictates that the king must lead the first dance with a member of staff. During the Gillies Ball, extraordinary moments can occur that would be impossible under normal circumstances. A kitchen worker might find themselves dancing with a prince, or a groundskeeper could share a conversation with a duchess. These interactions, while brief and heavily structured by protocol, represent rare moments when the rigid class distinctions that normally define life at Balmoral are temporarily relaxed. Stories from past Gillies balls have become part of estate folklore. Prince Philip was known for adding gin to the punch bowl to help guests relax and enjoy themselves more freely. Princess Diana once described the event as feeling like a high school prom mixed with a period drama, capturing both the festive atmosphere and the underlying formality that never completely disappears. However, even during this annual celebration, strict protocols remain in place. The type of invitation each staff member receives indicates their position in the estate hierarchy. Senior staff receive invitations with gold edges, while lower-ranking workers get plain cards. At exactly midnight, the royal family withdraws from the ball, and all staff members must bow silently as they leave. The evening ends abruptly, and normal working relationships resume the following morning. The ball represents one of the only occasions during the year when staff members are permitted to address the king by his first name, rather than using formal titles. For many workers, this brief moment of informality represents the highlight of their employment at Balmoral, making the long hours and strict conditions feel somewhat worthwhile. Photography during the Gillies Ball has been strictly prohibited since 1991, when a young footman violated the silence agreement by selling details about the event to a tabloid newspaper. The incident resulted in immediate dismissal and led to enhanced security measures that continue today. Staff members must surrender all cameras and mobile phones before the event begins, and security personnel monitor the proceedings to ensure no unauthorized recording occurs. Balmoral's remote location in the Scottish Highlands has always made it an ideal place for maintaining royal privacy and protecting family secrets. The estate can only be reached by a single winding road that passes through miles of empty moorland, making it easy to control access and monitor visitors. This isolation has allowed the royal family to conduct private business away from public scrutiny for over a century and a half. Throughout its history, Balmoral has witnessed numerous significant moments that required absolute secrecy. Queen Victoria conducted her controversial friendship with her Highland servant John Brown, largely at Balmoral, away from the disapproving eyes of court officials in London. The relationship, which some historians believe may have been romantic, was able to develop because of the privacy that Balmoral afforded. King Edward VIII used Balmoral as a retreat where he could practice the abdication speech that would end his reign and shock the world in 1936. The isolation of the estate allowed him to prepare for this momentous decision without interference or premature disclosure to the press. More recently, when Princess Diana died in Paris in 1997, Princes William and Harry were staying at Balmoral with their grandparents. The royal family made the decision to keep the boys at the estate and delay telling them about their mother's death for several hours. This allowed them to process the news in private, away from the media circus that immediately erupted around the tragedy. However, maintaining secrecy in the modern era has become increasingly challenging. In 2019, a cleaner violated protocol by taking and leaking photographs of the royal children's treehouse, which led to immediate policy changes. The palace banned all photography by staff members and ordered that windows in sensitive areas be covered or frosted to prevent unauthorized images. The incident prompted a comprehensive review of security measures that had been in place for decades. New technologies posed threats that previous generations of royal security had never needed to consider. The rise of social media meant that a single photograph could reach millions of people within minutes, making traditional approaches to controlling information inadequate. By 2024, these security concerns had evolved to include aerial surveillance. The estate installed what officials call sky fences, sophisticated technology designed to detect and deter unauthorized drones that might attempt to capture images or video of royal activities. These measures represent the latest evolution in the ongoing challenge of maintaining privacy at Balmoral in an increasingly connected world. Despite all these security measures and the strict agreements that all staff must sign, secrets from Balmoral continue to emerge periodically. The human desire to share extraordinary experiences, combined with the financial incentives offered by tabloid newspapers, means that maintaining absolute secrecy remains an ongoing challenge for the royal household. The traditions and protocols that govern life at Balmoral reflect a worldview that has remained largely unchanged since the Victorian era. While the outside world has undergone dramatic social and technological transformations, the estate continues to operate according to principles established more than a century ago. This creates a unique environment where modern people must adapt to historical expectations, often creating tension between contemporary values and traditional practices. Behind the grand facade of Balmoral Castle, and beneath the romantic traditions that capture public imagination, lies a much harsher reality for the people who actually make royal life possible. The daily experience of working at this Highland retreat reveals a system that has changed remarkably little since Victorian times, despite the dramatic social progress that has transformed the rest of Britain. The working day for the youngest staff members begins before dawn. At 6 o'clock each morning, while the Highland mist still clings to the mountains surrounding the estate, housekeepers and maids make their way to the oldest kitchen in the castle. Their first task involves polishing over 200 individual pieces of silver, a process that must be completed before breakfast is served at 8 o'clock sharp. This early morning routine sets the tone for days that stretch far beyond what most people would consider reasonable. These workers face 15-hour shifts that don't end until nearly 10 o'clock at night, when they finally reach their small attic bedrooms. The schedule allows for no overtime pay, despite the extreme length of these working days. Instead, staff members are told that their dedication represents something more valuable than money, with old employment manuals containing phrases like, "Loyalty is its own reward." The physical demands of maintaining Balmoral to royal standards are enormous. After completing the morning silver polishing, staff members must navigate the castle's cold stone corridors, carrying heavy tea kettles and serving equipment. They move carefully to avoid disturbing the numerous royal dogs that have free run of the castle, as waking these animals could result in complaints from their royal owners. Meal preparation represents another major challenge. Lunch preparation alone requires peeling 18 kilograms of potatoes daily, a task that must be completed while other duties continue simultaneously. Staff members must change into fresh uniforms multiple times per day to maintain the pristine appearance expected by the royal family. Tea service at 4 o'clock requires another complete preparation cycle, followed by the evening task of cleaning muddy boots and hunting equipment from the day's outdoor activities. The ban on vacuum cleaners at Balmoral, implemented because Queen Elizabeth II disliked their sound, created additional hardship for housekeeping staff. Every morning, 2 maids were required to clean the castle's extensive carpeted areas by getting down on their hands and knees and using small horsehair brushes. This process was not only physically demanding, but also extremely time-consuming, with a single hallway requiring 45 minutes of intensive scrubbing. The dust generated by this manual cleaning method was substantial, forcing workers to rinse their aprons twice daily to maintain acceptable cleanliness. Former staff members reported that their wrists became so painful from the repetitive brushing motion that they had difficulty eating properly. Despite these obvious health impacts, no one dared to complain openly about the policy. In 1990, the head housekeeper calculated that the vacuum cleaner ban had added 9 hours of additional work to each day's schedule. However, wages remained unchanged despite this dramatic increase in physical demands. The combination of longer hour and more strenuous work, with no additional compensation, created conditions that many former employees later described as unreasonable and unsustainable. The policy created a cycle of quiet suffering that permeated the castle's lower levels. Staff members endured physical pain and exhaustion while maintaining the perfect appearance that royal protocol demanded. The contrast between the spotless rooms that guests saw and the hidden physical cost of maintaining them became a symbol of the broader disconnect between public perception and private reality at Balmoral. Communication restrictions imposed on staff members created an atmosphere of tension and fear that went far beyond normal workplace boundaries. Workers were prohibited from speaking unless directly addressed by a member of the royal family, a rule that transformed the castle's corridors into spaces of enforced silence. The penalty for violating this rule was swift and severe, with written warnings issued for even minor infractions. In July 1986, a housemaid was cleaning when she accidentally overheard a private conversation between Prince Charles and Princess Diana. Another servant immediately warned her to act deaf, but the incident had already been noticed. The following morning, she received a formal written warning that remained in her employment file. The message was clear: staff members were expected to become invisible and inaudible when royals were present. The three-strike rule governing these communication violations meant that a second offense would result in immediate dismissal and loss of the £250 end-of-season bonus that many staff members depended upon financially. This created an environment where workers developed elaborate systems of hand signals to communicate during breakfast service and other times when silence was mandatory. Former employees described the halls of Balmoral as quieter than a library, but noted that this silence stemmed from fear rather than respect. Everyone understood that they were constantly being watched and evaluated, and that their continued employment depended on their ability to remain effectively invisible while performing their duties. The compensation offered to Balmoral staff was inadequate, given the demands of their positions and the cost of living in Scotland. In 1983, the lowest-level housemaid earned £18,000 before taxes, which represented only £4,000 more than the average British worker despite working 60 hours per week and living at the castle full-time. The progression system offered little hope for meaningful improvement. After 3 years of service, a worker could advance to the position of first housemaid, but this promotion only increased annual pay to £21,500. Meanwhile, male gamekeepers on the same estate earned approximately £26,000 annually, highlighting a significant gender-based pay disparity that reflected broader social inequalities of the time. Many female staff members left after just 1 year of employment, unable to sustain themselves financially or physically under these conditions. The combination of low wages, long hours, and demanding physical work created a turnover rate that constantly required new hiring and training. Yet the underlying conditions remained unchanged. Living conditions for staff members were another source of hardship that the royal family seemed unable or unwilling to address adequately. Some areas of the staff quarters still relied on chamber pots rather than modern plumbing, requiring maids to manually carry waste containers as part of their daily duties. These conditions persisted well into the modern era, reflecting a disregard for worker dignity that seemed inconsistent with contemporary standards. Royal historian Patrick Thorncroft later observed that these conditions created what he described as quiet tension that was never spoken but always felt, like standing in the cold wearing silk gloves. This metaphor captured the way that luxury and hardship coexisted at Balmoral, with magnificent surroundings failing to mask the fundamental discomfort experienced by those who maintained them. Perhaps no single tradition better exemplified the systematic erosion of worker dignity than the requirement to curtsy to empty rooms. This rule mandated that if a royal family member left a room and a staff member entered moments later, the worker must still perform a full curtsy to the vacant space. The practice was intended to honor what palace officials called the spirit of the royal who had just been there. During the 1987 Gillies Ball, staff members were required to perform this empty room curtsy 61 times in a single evening. The physical impact was immediate and painful, with many workers developing bruised knees so severe that bandages had to be distributed along with serving trays. The practice continued despite these obvious physical consequences. One former maid described the experience as curtsying to ghosts, a phrase that captured both the surreal nature of the requirement and its psychological impact on workers. The rule represented a powerful symbol of how staff members were expected to subordinate their physical comfort and personal dignity to traditions that served no practical purpose beyond reinforcing hierarchical relationships. The cumulative effect of these policies was to create an environment where worker well-being was consistently sacrificed to maintain traditions and appearances. Staff members found themselves trapped between their need for employment and working conditions that many found increasingly difficult to endure. The system seemed designed to ensure that the comfort and preferences of the royal family took absolute precedence over the basic needs and dignity of the people who served them. This pattern of prioritizing tradition over worker welfare would eventually reach a breaking point as growing numbers of staff members began to question whether their sacrifice was truly necessary or justified. The foundations of the system that had operated largely unchanged since Victorian times were beginning to show serious cracks that would soon become impossible to ignore. The breaking point for the system that had operated at Balmoral for over a century began with a single magazine article published in March 1988. A French publication printed a story that would shake the foundations of royal privacy and reveal intimate details about life inside the Highland Castle that had never been intended for public consumption. The source of this explosive revelation was a young maid who had worked at Balmoral for just 8 weeks during the previous summer. Her brief employment had provided her with access to private royal moments, daily routines, and personal interactions that she then sold to journalists for approximately £10,000. This amount represented more money than she could have earned in 8 years of regular employment, making the financial incentive for breaking her silence agreement impossible to ignore. Her story provided the public with unprecedented insights into royal life behind closed doors. She revealed details about dinner routines, private family moments, and even which dogs were allowed to sleep near Princess Anne's bedroom. The information she shared painted a picture of royals as real people with everyday habits and preferences, stripping away much of the mystique that the palace worked so hard to maintain. Within 2 days of the French publication, British tabloids had picked up the story and were running their own versions for domestic audiences. Suddenly, millions of people were reading intimate details about royal life that had been carefully guarded secrets for generations. The palace found itself dealing with a privacy breach unlike anything they had experienced in the modern era. One of the most revealing stories the Maids shared occurred during August 1987, when a dinner guest accidentally drank from a finger bowl, mistaking the rose-scented water for soup. Rather than allowing the guest to suffer embarrassment, Queen Elizabeth and the entire royal family quietly followed his lead and sipped from their own finger bowls. Staff members later counted 17 empty bowls after that dinner, a small gesture that revealed the family's capacity for kindness and consideration in private moments. However, not all the revelations were as charming. The Maid also described tensions during Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher's summer visit in 1987. According to her account, the Queen did not invite Thatcher to stay in the main castle, as was customary for important guests. Instead, the Prime Minister was housed in a small cottage far from the main building, which staff members privately referred to as Siberia. Whether this represented a deliberate slight or simply protocol was unclear, but the story fueled speculation about the relationship between these two powerful women. The palace's response to this breach was swift and comprehensive. Within hours of the story reaching the public, officials issued a harsh statement condemning what they called a gross breach of trust. They immediately launched an internal investigation that examined all 348 staff members who had worked during the previous season, looking for security vulnerabilities and potential future risks. The incident prompted immediate changes to employment practices that had remained largely unchanged since Victorian times. New workers were now required to undergo extensive background checks and sign secrecy agreements tied to the Official Secrets Act, the same legislation used to protect national security information. The message was clear: violating royal privacy would now carry the same legal consequences as betraying state secrets. These enhanced security measures created an atmosphere of suspicion and fear among staff that went beyond the already strict conditions they had endured for decades. Workers understood that speaking to journalists could now result in criminal prosecution, rather than simply losing their jobs. The legal framework that had once protected only the most sensitive government information was now being used to protect royal breakfast preferences and family gossip. The enhanced secrecy agreements also carried financial penalties that could devastate working-class employees. Staff members could face lawsuits demanding six-figure compensation for any breach of their silence agreements. For workers earning barely above minimum wage, these potential penalties represented financial ruin that could affect their families for generations. Despite these intimidating legal consequences, the fundamental problems that made staff members vulnerable to financial incentives remained unchanged. Low wages, poor working conditions, and lack of job security continue to create situations where the money offered by tabloid newspapers represented life-changing opportunities for desperate workers. The pattern of betrayal and harsh retaliation continued throughout the following decades, with each incident leading to even more restrictive policies, rather than addressing the underlying conditions that motivated staff to speak out. In 1950, Marion Crawford, who had served as governess to young Princess Elizabeth and Princess Margaret for 16 years, published a memoir that shared innocent stories about the princess's childhood. Her book revealed harmless details like how the girls swam in public pools and once waited in line for the underground like ordinary children. The royal family's response to Crawford's memoir was devastating and permanent. Queen Elizabeth, who was still Princess Elizabeth at the time, and the Queen Mother never spoke to their former governess again. Crawford lost her Grace and Favor cottage and lived the remainder of her life under an assumed name. When she died in 1988, not a single member of the royal family attended her funeral, sending a clear message about the consequences of breaking the silence barrier. Paul Burrell, who had been one of Princess Diana's most trusted servants, published his own memoir in 2003 after facing legal troubles related to items he claimed Diana had given him. His book revealed heated arguments at Balmoral and shared private correspondence, but it also demonstrated how former staff members could face both criminal prosecution and civil lawsuits for their revelations. Before his book's publication, police had raided his home and found 342 royal items, though the case collapsed when Queen Elizabeth herself intervened, saying she remembered discussing the items with him. The year 2024 brought another serious breach when someone at the London clinic attempted to access Princess Kate's private medical records while she was recovering from surgery. This incident, which became public in March, resulted in criminal investigations and potential fines of up to £17.5 million for the medical facility. 3 workers faced review, and the clinic warned all staff that they could face criminal charges for accessing unauthorized patient information. By 2024 and 2025, the accumulated pressure of decades of poor working conditions finally reached a critical mass. Staff turnover rates at royal estates began climbing dramatically, reaching 38%, which was double the normal rate for the hospitality industry. Workers were no longer willing to accept the combination of low wages, demanding conditions, and strict restrictions that had defined royal employment for generations. The crisis became visible to the public when Balmoral was forced to close its doors to tourists on August 4, 2025. The official explanation cited storm damage from winds reaching 90 miles per hour, but the real reason was that nearly 2/3 of the room attendants had walked out the night before. They refused to continue sleeping in deteriorating staff quarters, where roofs were collapsing and basic amenities were inadequate. Modern staff members began using social media and online review platforms to share their experiences in ways that previous generations could not have imagined. Reviews on job sites describe management as toxic, with supervisors yelling at staff in front of guests and docking break times as punishment for minor infractions. Workers reported earning just £10.90 per hour, which was significantly below the real living wage in the United Kingdom. The moment that crystallized public attention came in June 2023, when a young maid known only as Heather Glenn posted on an online forum about being denied emergency leave to be with her mother during surgery. She was told she had to remain at work to starch Princess Kate's linens instead of supporting her family during a medical crisis. Her post went viral, attracting over 11,000 comments and sparking widespread public criticism of royal employment practices. The financial disparity between royal wealth and staff wages became impossible to ignore when anonymous payroll files were leaked in October 2024. These documents revealed that while senior royal aides earned £146,000 annually, maids earned just £19,500 and were required to share rooms. The pay gap represented a 7-fold difference between the highest and lowest paid employees working in the same institution. Meanwhile, the sovereign grant, which represents public money given to the royal family, had increased by 41% over 10 years to reach £85.9 million, while staff wages had barely increased by 6%. This disparity highlighted how royal wealth continued to grow, while the people who made royal life possible remained trapped in poverty-level employment. King Charles's personal fortune, estimated at over £1.1 billion, made the refusal to pay living wages seem even more unreasonable to critics. The estimated cost of raising all staff wages to fair levels would have been approximately £187,000 per year, less than the amount spent on resurfacing the private helipad. The collapse of the traditional system of royal employment represents more than just a labor dispute. It reflects fundamental changes in social expectations and worker rights that have made the Victorian-era employment practices at Balmoral increasingly unsustainable. Modern workers are no longer willing to sacrifice their dignity, health, and financial security to maintain traditions that primarily benefit the wealthy and powerful. The future of royal estates like Balmoral now depends on their ability to adapt to contemporary standards of employment while maintaining the traditions and privacy that the royal family considers essential. Whether this balance can be achieved without fundamentally changing the nature of royal life remains an open question that will likely define the monarchy's relationship with its workforce for generations to come.